Have you ever watched your own father look away just to avoid witnessing his wife strike you? They told me to keep quiet because family is family. They signed papers and claimed their shares, assuming I was invisible, but they did not know I held a recording capable of destroying their perfect narrative. When I finally pressed play, the silence in that lawyer's office hit harder than a blizzard on Lake Erie. My name is Lila Haynes, and if there is one thing I have learned after 27 years on this earth, it is that silence is the loudest weapon in a family arsenal. Standing here, pressed against the floor-to-ceiling glass of my conference room, I watched the gray waves of Lake Erie crash against the frozen shoreline of Cleveland. It was the kind of cold that seeped through coats and settled in the marrow, a bitter chill that people in Ohio claimed built character, but mostly just built resentment. The city below looked like a circuit board dusted with powdered sugar, beautiful and distant. From this height, the people were invisible. From this height, I felt untouchable. The vibration of my phone on the mahogany table shattered the stillness. It was a short, sharp buzz, demanding attention. I did not need to look at the screen to know who it was. The timing was too perfect. The reading of my grandmother's will was scheduled for this Friday in Columbus, and the preliminary maneuvering had already begun. I picked up the device. The screen glowed with a single message from Dad. The reading of the will this week is just for immediate family. It is going to be me, Lydia, and Ryder. Do not come. We will let you know if she left you a keepsake. I read the words once, then I read them twice. Immediate family. There it was again, that invisible line drawn in the sand, constantly shifting to ensure I was always on the outside of it. For years, those two words would have been enough to send me spiraling into a bathroom stall to stifle my sobs. For years, that casual exclusion would have felt like a physical blow to the chest, a reminder that in the house I grew up in, I was nothing more than furniture that had outstayed its welcome. Lydia, my stepmother, had mastered the art of defining family in a way that mathematically excluded me, and my father, the man who had once carried me on his shoulders before my mother died, had simply learned to look the other way and nod in agreement. But today, the tears did not come. The tightness in my throat did not manifest. Instead, a dry, humorless laugh escaped my lips, fogging the glass in front of me for a brief second before fading away. Immediate family, I whispered to the empty room. They truly believed I was still the 19-year-old girl they had broken. They thought I was still the desperate daughter scraping by on student loans, living in a drafty rental apartment, praying for a seat at their table. They imagined me reading this text in a panic, perhaps checking my bank account to see if I could afford the gas to drive down and beg for entry. They thought they were protecting the assets for Ryder, the golden son, the boy who could do no wrong. They thought they were saving themselves the embarrassment of my presence. I typed back a response with steady fingers, 2 words. That is fine. I hit send. The simplicity of it must have been satisfying for them. I could picture Lydia sitting in her sunroom, sipping her Chardonnay, nodding approvingly as my father showed her the screen. See? She is compliant. She knows her place. She is not going to cause a scene. They would relax now. They would spend the next 3 days planning how to spend Grandma Eleanor's money, discussing renovations, new cars for Ryder, perhaps a vacation to Europe. They would walk into that law office on Friday with their heads held high, confident that the nuisance of Lila Haynes had been handled with a single text message. They had absolutely no idea. I turned away from the window and walked across the expanse of the room. This was not a rented corporate space. This was not a borrowed office. This was the penthouse of the Vanguard building, and I owned every square inch of it. The deed was in my name. The mortgage was paid off 3 years ago. The sprawling, open-concept living area, the chef's kitchen with the marble island, the state-of-the-art security system. It was all mine. My family believed I worked a mid-level administrative job, barely making ends meet. They believed this because I let them believe it. When I visited, I wore simple clothes. I drove a rental car that was 5 years old. I never talked about my work. I never mentioned that Northbridge Sentinel was not just a security firm. but the premier data intelligence agency in the tri-state area. I never mentioned that I was not a secretary, but a senior analyst and shareholder who specialized in forensic accounting and digital retrieval. I did not build this life with their help. I built it in spite of their sabotage. I walked over to my desk, a slab of reclaimed wood that cost more than the car Ryder was currently driving. I tapped my laptop awake. There, sitting at the top of my inbox, was an email from the law firm of Holloway and Crestwell. The subject line was stark and official. Mandatory attendance required. Estate of Eleanor Haynes. I clicked it open, just to savor the words one more time. Dear Ms. Haynes, per the explicit instructions of the late Eleanor Haynes, your presence is required as the primary executor of the last will and testament. Please be advised that the reading cannot proceed, and no assets may be unsealed, without your physical presence and biometric authorization. We look forward to seeing you at 9 a.m. on Friday. Sincerely, Arthur Holloway, Senior Partner. Executor. I was not just a beneficiary, I was the gatekeeper. My father and Lydia did not know. Grandma Eleanor had played her cards with the cunning of a grandmaster. In her final months, when the cancer was eating away at her fading strength, she had summoned me, not to the family house where Lydia hovered like a vulture, but to a private meeting at the hospital, arranged by her lawyers. I remembered the smell of antiseptic and the beep of the monitors. I remembered how frail her hand felt in mine, her skin like parchment paper, but her eyes were sharp, clear, and burning with a fire I had not seen in decades. They think I am blind. Nyla, she had rasped, her voice weak but her diction precise. Lydia thinks because I am old. I do not see how she treats you. Your father thinks because he is silent. I do not hear what he does not say. She had squeezed my hand then, a grip surprisingly strong for a dying woman. I have spent the last 6 months rewriting everything, she told me. Arthur Holloway is a good man. He knows the truth. I have made you the executor. You control the narrative now. I had tried to protest. I told her it would cause a war. I told her Lydia would scream and my father would disown me. Grandma Eleanor had smiled, a wicked, knowing smile. Let them scream. Let them show the world exactly who they are. It is time you spoke up. Nyla, you have held that poison inside you for too long, and when you do speak, you will not be standing alone. I have made sure of that. She died 2 weeks later. Since then, the family had performed their grief beautifully. Lydia posted long, weeping tributes on social media, garnering hundreds of likes and sympathy comments. Ryder wore a black suit and looked suitably somber at the funeral, accepting condolences for the grandmother he had barely visited unless he needed cash. My father looked lost, a man realizing his buffer against the world was gone. And me? I stood at the back. I was the shadow. I was the afterthought. When the obituary was published in the local paper, my name was listed last, after the cousins, almost like a typo, also survived by granddaughter Nyla. I looked back at the phone on the table. My reply, "That is fine," was the final lock on the trap. By agreeing not to come, I had ensured their guard would be completely down. They would walk into Holloway and Crestwell expecting a quick rubber stamp procedure. They would expect to sign some papers, receive a check for $2 million, and go to lunch. Instead, they were going to walk into a room where I sat at the head of the table. I picked up a flash drive that sat next to my laptop. It was a small, unassuming piece of metal and plastic, silver with a black cap. It looked like something you might find in a junk drawer, holding old term papers or holiday photos. But the data encrypted inside this drive was heavier than the building I was standing in. It contained the audio file. For 8 years, I had never listened to it. I did not need to. The sounds were burned into my memory with the fidelity of a master recording. I could still feel the stinging heat on my cheek. I could still smell the lemon pledge on the kitchen floor where I fell. I could still hear the specific frequency of my father's silence, the sound of a man holding his breath so he would not have to intervene. Lydia thought that moment was gone. She thought violence without witnesses was just a rumor, She relied on the old adage, "It is your word against mine, and I am the mother." She banked on the fact that victims are usually too ashamed, too scared, or too broken to fight back. She banked on the fact that family secrets are meant to be buried in the backyard along with the pets. She forgot that we live in a digital age. She forgot that I am a data analyst. And mostly, she forgot that the quietest child in the room is the one who observes everything. I slipped the flash drive into the pocket of my blazer. The weight of it felt reassuring. The wind howled outside, rattling the heavy panes of glass. A storm was coming across the lake, bringing snow and ice that would shut down the city. But I was not worried about the cold. I had lived in the cold for 20 years. I had lived in the emotional permafrost of a home where I was tolerated but never wanted. I checked the time. It was 4 in the afternoon. I had work to finish before I drove to Columbus. I had to review the final forensic accounting reports on my father's business dealings. Another little surprise Grandma Eleanor had asked me to look into. It turned out that Lydia's lavish lifestyle had strained more than just the family dynamic. It had strained the ledger, too. They were desperate for this inheritance. They needed this money not just for luxury, but for survival. That made what I was about to do even more devastating. I walked to the kitchen and poured myself a glass of water. The reflection in the stainless steel refrigerator showed a woman in a tailored suit, hair pulled back in a severe professional bun. I did not look like the scared teenager named Nyla who used to hide in the attic. I looked like a CEO. I looked like a prosecutor. "Don't come," my father had texted. I took a sip of water. The coolness was refreshing. "Oh, I am coming, Dad," I said aloud, my voice echoing slightly in the large, silent apartment. "And I am bringing the ghosts with me." They wanted a family gathering? Fine, we would have a family gathering. We would sit around a table, and for the first time in the history of the Haynes family, we would not talk about the weather, or Ryder's football stats, or Lydia's garden club. We would talk about the truth. I looked at the panoramic view of the city one last time. The lights were flickering on, a sea of amber and white against the deepening blue of the winter twilight. Somewhere down there, in a suburb 2 hours away, my stepmother was likely laughing, telling Ryder that he was about to be a rich man. She was likely patting my father on the arm, telling him he did the right thing by telling me to stay away, that it was better for everyone if drama was avoided. They thought I would never speak up about the way she treated me. They thought the bruises had healed and the memories had faded. They thought the statute of limitations on my pain had expired. They thought wrong. I set the glass down on the coaster with a deliberate, sharp click. The sound was final. The wait was over. The will was about to be read, and the winter in that room was going to make this blizzard outside look like a tropical breeze. To understand the silence of that boardroom in the present, you have to understand the noise of the past. Or rather, you have to understand how the noise slowly died away until there was nothing left but a quiet, suffocating hum. Before the penthouse, before the lawsuits, and before the betrayal, there was just a small yellow house on a cul-de-sac in Ohio. It was the kind of house where the floorboards creaked in a language only the residents understood, and the smell of cinnamon and fabric softener was permanently etched into the drywall. That was where I lived with my mother. My memories of her are like old Polaroid photographs that have been left in the sun too long. Warm, golden, but fading at the edges. I remember her hands, always dusted with flour or potting soil. I remember that we were a team. My father was there, of course, but he was a satellite orbiting the binary star system that was my mother and me. We had inside jokes. We had movie nights on Fridays, where we would eat popcorn for dinner. We had a life that felt full, even if we did not have much money. Then the cancer came, swift and merciless, and the binary star collapsed. I was 10 years old when the house went quiet. The cinnamon smell faded, replaced by the sterile scent of bleach and my father's desperate, heavy grief. For a year. We were like two ghosts bumping into each other in the hallway, unsure of how to exist without the woman who had anchored us. I tried to step up. I tried to learn how to cook the meals she made. I tried to iron his shirts. I wanted us to be a team again. just a smaller one. But my father did not want a teammate. He wanted a savior. He found her in less than 18 months. Her name was Lydia. She met my father at a grieving support group, which in hindsight was the perfect hunting ground for a predator looking for wounded prey. I remember the first time she came to dinner. She brought a lasagna that was perfectly baked and a smile that did not quite reach her eyes. She wore pearls and a cashmere sweater, looking vastly out of place in our humble kitchen with its mismatched chairs. She spent the entire evening asking my father about his job, his hobbies, his hopes. She touched his arm when he spoke. She laughed at his dry jokes, but she never once looked directly at me. It was as if I were a smudge on the lens of her camera, something to be looked past or edited out later. When they got married 6 months later, it was a whirlwind. And just like that, the yellow house was no longer mine. Lydia moved in, and she did not come alone. She brought Ryder. Ryder was 2 years younger than me, a boy with cherubic cheeks and a loud, demanding presence that immediately sucked all the oxygen out of the room. He was not a bad kid. Not at first. He was just a child who had been taught that the world existed to serve him. And my father, desperate to keep his new wife happy, was all too eager to serve. The shift in the household dynamic was not an explosion. It was a slow, creeping erosion. It started with the introductions, when neighbors or old friends would stop by. Lydia would rush to the door, placing a protective hand on Ryder's shoulder. "This is my son, Ryder." She would beam, pushing him forward. "He is getting straight A grades in math already. He is going to be an engineer. I just know it." The neighbors would smile and coo. Then, their eyes would drift to me, standing awkwardly in the hallway, holding a laundry basket or a stack of books. "And this is Nyla," Lydia would say, her voice dropping an octave, losing its warmth. "The oldest." That was it. No accolades, no future predictions, just a biological fact stated with the enthusiasm of someone reading a grocery list. The oldest, as if my existence was merely a chronological marker to define when her real family began. My father never corrected her. He would just stand there, smiling that vague, detached smile, happy that the house was full of noise again, even if the noise was not for me. The erosion continued with the physical space. My mother's sewing room became Ryder's playroom because a boy needs space to build things. My spot at the head of the table, where I used to help Mom serve, was given to Lydia. I was moved to the side, next to the wall, where I had to squeeze in so as not to block the walkway. But the most painful thing was not the loss of space, it was the loss of visibility. I remember the first Christmas with the new family. I was 12. In the past, Christmas had been a chaotic, joyful mess of wrapping paper and bad singing. That year, Lydia coordinated everything. The tree was decorated in gold and silver. "Classy," she called it, and my old handmade ornaments were nowhere to be seen. Under the tree, the pile of gifts was visibly lopsided. For Ryder, there was a new bicycle, a video game console, and a stack of brand-name clothes. For me, there were socks, a generic sweater that was 2 sizes too large, and a set of school supplies. Lydia smiled as I opened the pencils. "Education is so important." "Nyla," she said sweetly, "we want to make sure you have what you need to focus." Then she turned to Ryder, clapping her hands as he tore into the wrapping of the game console. "Look at that. You are going to have so much fun." I looked at my father. He was sipping his coffee, watching Ryder with a look of adoration. He did not look at me. He did not see the pile of pencils in my lap. He did not see that the sweater was gray, a color I hated. He only saw the happiness of his new wife and her son. In that moment, I realized that to him, peace was more important than fairness. If ignoring me kept Lydia smiling, then he would ignore me until the end of time. As the years went by, the exclusion became a routine, almost a tradition. Every summer, the county fair came to town. It was the highlight of the year for every kid in our district. The lights, the fried dough, the Ferris wheel. It was magic. When I was 14, I came downstairs on a Saturday morning, dressed and ready to go. I had saved my allowance for weeks. Lydia was in the kitchen, packing a cooler. Ryder was already in the car, honking the horn impatiently. "Where are you going?" Lydia asked, looking up from her sandwich making as if surprised to see me. "To the fair," I said, confused. "With you guys?" "Oh. Honey," she said, and there was that word again. Honey, dripping with artificial sweetness. "We cannot all go. The dog has been acting sick all morning. Someone needs to stay here and watch him in case he throws up." I looked at the dog, a golden retriever named Buster. He was currently sleeping peacefully in the sun, looking the picture of health. "He looks fine," I said. "You are not a vet." "Nyla," she snapped, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. "Besides, the car is full with the cooler and the chairs. There is just no room. You understand, right? You are the big sister. You need to be responsible." Responsible. That was the code word for expendable. My father walked into the kitchen then, grabbing his keys. "Ready to go?" he asked Lydia. "Nyla is going to stay and watch Buster," Lydia said, linking her arm through his. "She volunteered. Isn't that sweet of her?" I looked at my father, silently begging him to intervene. I wanted him to say, "No, we will make room. Nyla is coming." I wanted him to remember the times just the two of us went to the fair, before Lydia, before Ryder. "That is good of you, Nyla," he said, patting my shoulder absently as he walked past me. "We will bring you back a funnel cake." They didn't bring back a funnel cake. They forgot. I spent that entire Saturday sitting on the front porch, listening to the distant music of the carousel carried on the wind, watching the dog sleep. He never threw up. He never even woke up. I sat there and watched the sun go down, feeling a cold, hard knot form in my stomach. It wasn't hatred yet. It was just a profound, aching loneliness. It was the feeling of realizing that you could disappear from the face of the earth, and your own family would only notice because there was no one left to watch the dog. By the time I was 16, I had learned to make myself small. I learned that speaking up only led to gaslighting. If I complained that Ryder got a new laptop while I was using a library computer, I was called jealous. If I pointed out that they went to the movies without me, I was called ungrateful for the roof over my head. So I stopped asking. I stopped expecting. I became a ghost in the hallways of the house I grew up in. The final confirmation of my status came in the form of the family portraits. Lydia was obsessed with documenting their perfect life, every year. We went to a studio to have professional photos taken. We were instructed to wear matching outfits, usually white shirts and denim, a look that made us seem like a cohesive unit, a lie told in cotton and denim. During my junior year of high school, the photographer was trying to arrange us. "Okay, let's get Mom and Dad in the middle, sitting on the bench," he directed. "Son, you stand right behind them, center frame. Place your hands on their shoulders. Perfect. Now, daughter." He looked at me, then looked at the composition. There was no obvious place for me. The triangle of father, mother, and son was tight and complete. "Just stand on the far left," the photographer said, waving his hand. "A little further back. We need to balance the shot." I stepped to the left. "A little more," Lydia said without looking at me, fixing Ryder's collar. "We want to see the background." I stepped further away, until there was a visible gap between my shoulder and my father's arm. I was in the frame, but I was not of the group. I was a bystander, an observer. When the large canvas print arrived 2 weeks later, Lydia hung it prominently over the fireplace. I walked into the living room and stared at it. It was a beautiful picture. My father looked handsome. Lydia looked radiant. Ryder looked like the cherished heir apparent. And me? The frame cut off half of my left arm. I was blurred slightly, as if I had moved, or as if the camera simply refused to focus on something so inconsequential. But the most telling detail was the gap. You could fit an entire person in the space between my family and me. Lydia came up behind me, holding a glass of iced tea. "It turned out great, didn't it?" she said, admiring the photo. We all looked so happy. She did not mention that I looked like a stranger photobombing a private moment. She did not mention that she had chosen the one shot where I was furthest away. I realized then that this was not accidental. It was architectural. She was building a memory of a family that did not include me, editing the past and the present in real time. She was training my father, and the world, to see a version of reality where Nyla Haynes was just a blurry figure on the periphery, easily cropped out when the time was right. I turned to her and lied, just as I had learned to do to survive. "Yes," I said quietly, "it is beautiful." I went up to my room, the small guest room they had moved me into when Ryder wanted the bigger view, and I sat on the bed. I did not cry. Crying implied that I was surprised. Crying implied that I still had hope that things would change. Instead, I looked at the mirror and practiced my neutral face, the face that showed no pain, the face that gave them no ammunition. I was learning the most important lesson of my life, one that would serve me well in the cold boardroom years later. If they treat you like a ghost, then learn to walk through walls. If they treat you like you are invisible, use that invisibility to watch, to listen, and to remember. They thought they were pushing me out. They did not realize they were pushing me into the shadows where I could see everything they were trying to hide. Ryder was the star. Lydia was the director. My father was the producer. And I was just the audience. But what they forgot about the audience is that we are the ones who write the reviews, and we are the ones who decide when the show is over. That night, lying in the dark, I heard them laughing downstairs. They were watching a movie. I could hear the smell of popcorn wafting up the vents. It smelled like the Fridays with my mother, but twisted, wrong. I rolled over and faced the wall. I did not go downstairs. I stayed in my room, in the dark, and I started to plan. Not for revenge, not yet, just for escape. I knew that the only way to survive this family was to leave it behind. But I had no idea that leaving would be the hardest thing I would ever do, or that the price of my exit would be the last shred of my father's dignity. That was still to come. For now, I was just the girl on the edge of the photograph, waiting for the shutter to click one last time. 18 is supposed to be the age of liberation. It is the year the world hands you a key and tells you that the door is finally unlocked. For most of my classmates, senior year was a victory lap of prom dresses, college tours, and the sweet, giddy anticipation of leaving home. But in the Haynes household, 18 did not feel like a beginning. It felt like an expiration date. I had become a ghost that refused to be exorcised, a lingering presence that took up space, consumed food, and reminded everyone of a past they were desperate to pave over. The acceptance letter from the University of Massachusetts in Boston arrived on a Tuesday. It was a gray, slushy afternoon, the kind that makes Ohio feel like a permanent purgatory. I stood by the mailbox at the end of the driveway, my hands trembling inside my coat pockets as I tore open the thick envelope. "Congratulations, Nyla Haynes." I read those words and felt the first full breath I had taken in years expand my lungs. Boston. It was 600 miles away. It might as well have been the moon. It was a public university, not the Ivy League dreams my mother had once whispered into my ear while brushing my hair. But it was a ticket out. It was a dorm room with a lock. It was a cafeteria where no one would count how much I ate. It was freedom. But freedom costs money. I walked into the house, the letter clutched to my chest like a shield. The house smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, Lydia's specialty. My father and Ryder were already at the table. Ryder was 16 now, broad-shouldered and loud, taking up 2/3 of the conversation and half the physical space in the room. He was talking about football camp, about how the coach said he had natural talent that just needed the right equipment to shine. I sat down in my usual spot, the chair that wobbled slightly because one leg was uneven. No one had ever fixed it. "I got in," I said. The chatter stopped for a fraction of a second. My father looked up from his mashed potatoes, blinking as if waking from a trance. "Got in where?" he asked. "UMass Boston," I said, placing the letter on the table. I tried to keep the desperate hope out of my voice. "I got accepted. For the fall semester." That is far, Lydia said. She did not look at the letter. She continued cutting her chicken into precise, geometric shapes. Boston is very expensive. Nyla, the cost of living is triple what it is here. I know, I said. I have looked at the numbers. I can work part-time. And with the financial aid package and Mom's fund, I can make it work. The silence that followed was heavy, sudden, and absolute. It was not the comfortable silence of a pause in conversation. It was the suck of air before a vacuum seals shut. My father put his fork down. He looked at his plate, studying the gravy as if it held the secrets of the universe. Mom's fund, Lydia repeated. Her voice was soft, dangerously reasonable. You mean the family savings account? I mean the college fund, I said, my heart starting to hammer against my ribs. The one Mom started when I was born, the one she put half her paycheck into every month until she got sick. She told me it was for school. She showed me the passbook. I looked at my father. Dad, you know the one, the blue book from First National. He did not look up. He picked up his glass of water and took a long, slow sip. Lydia placed her knife and fork down and wiped her mouth with her napkin. She turned her body toward me, her expression one of pitying patience, as if explaining quantum physics to a toddler. Nyla, sweetie, she began, I think there is a misunderstanding about how finances work in a marriage. When your mother passed away, her assets didn't just sit in a frozen box. They became part of the estate, your father's estate. But it was for me, I insisted, my voice rising. It was specifically for my education. It was money, Lydia corrected. And money is fluid. We have to look at the needs of the entire family, not just one person. She gestured toward Ryder, who was busy texting under the table, completely unbothered by the dismantling of my future. Ryder has shown incredible potential in engineering, Lydia said. We have been looking at preparatory programs, private tutoring, and of course, university for him is only 2 years away. We have to be strategic. Ryder's aptitude tests suggest he could go to a top-tier school. That requires significant investment. I felt the blood drain from my face. So you are saying, what? That I cannot use the money my mother saved for me because Ryder might need it in 2 years? I am saying we need to invest in the future that yields the highest return for the family, Lydia said coldly. It is just economics. Nyla, don't be emotional. Emotional? I stared at her. It is theft. Watch your tone, my father said. It was the first time he had spoken since I mentioned the money. He did not look angry. He looked tired. He looked like a man who just wanted to eat his roast chicken without having to deal with the ghost of his dead wife. Dad, I said, turning to him, pleading. Please, Mom worked double shifts for that money. There was over $40,000 in there. That covers my tuition for 2 years. Please. Nyla, he sighed. Lydia handles the finances now. She is good at it. We have to do what is best for everyone. But it is not for everyone, I cried out. It is for Ryder. It is always for Ryder. That is enough, Lydia snapped, slamming her hand on the table. The silverware jumped. You are being incredibly selfish. Nyla, we have kept a roof over your head. We have fed you. We have clothed you. And now you demand to drain our savings just so you can run away to Boston and study. What? Liberal arts? While your brother actually has a plan? She looked at my father. Tell her, Frank, tell her how tight things are. My father looked at me. For a second, I saw a flicker of shame in his eyes. I saw the man who used to carry me on his shoulders. But then he looked at Lydia, and the flicker died. The money is not there, Nyla, he said quietly. Not for you. I sat there, frozen. The acceptance letter lay on the table between us, a piece of paper that was suddenly worthless. Not there, I whispered. I stood up and left the table. I walked up to my room, locked the door, and slid down against the wood. I did not cry. I was past crying. I felt a cold, hard clarity settling in my chest. They were not just indifferent to me. They were actively cannibalizing my life to feed their golden child. 2 weeks later, the final nail was hammered into the coffin. I came home from my shift at the local diner, one of the 2 jobs I was working to save up cash. As I walked up the driveway, I saw it. Parked right in the center of the driveway, gleaming under the porch lights, was a brand new SUV. It was black, massive, with leather seats and a sunroof. Ryder was standing next to it, holding a set of keys, grinning like he had just won the lottery. Lydia was snapping photos with her phone. My father was kicking the tires, nodding approvingly. "Safety first," I heard Lydia say. "A new driver needs a solid vehicle. We cannot have him driving some old rust bucket." I walked up to them. My legs felt heavy, like I was wading through wet concrete. "Whose car is this?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Mine," Ryder crowed. "Dad and Mom got it for me. Early graduation present. Plus, I need it to get to football camp." I looked at the sticker in the window. The price was listed clearly, $38,000. It was almost the exact amount that had been in my mother's fund. I looked at Lydia. She met my gaze, challenging me. There was no guilt in her eyes, only a smug satisfaction. She knew I knew. She wanted me to know. This was a message. This is where you rank. "Nyla, your mother's life savings are worth exactly 1 car for my son." "You bought him a car," I said, my voice flat. "With the college fund." "We bought him reliable transportation," Lydia said, smoothing her sweater. "It came from the family account. As I told you, Nyla, we have to prioritize." "I have to take out loans," I said. "I have to go into debt for decades to go to school. And you bought him a car." "You are an adult," Lydia shrugged. "It is time you learned responsibility. Handouts make people weak. We are doing you a favor, really." My father was busy showing Ryder how to adjust the side mirrors. He did not turn around. I walked past them, past the shining metal beast that had eaten my inheritance, and went into the house. I went to the kitchen table where my FAFSA paperwork and loan applications were spread out. I sat down and picked up the pen. The interest rates were high. The terms were predatory. I would be paying this off until I was 40. I looked at the numbers. 10,000 here, 15,000 there. It was a mountain of debt that would crush me before I even started. Lydia came into the kitchen a moment later to get a glass of water. She saw me staring at the papers. "Stop moping," she said. "You are bringing down the mood. Ryder is happy. Can't you just be happy for your brother for once?" "I am filling out loan papers, Lydia," I said. "I am signing away my financial future because you stole my money." "Stole?" She laughed, a harsh barking sound. "You are delusional. Your father is his legal guardian. He can spend his money however he sees fit, if you are going to use words like that. Maybe you should find somewhere else to live." "I am," I said. I signed the bottom of the page. The ink was dark and permanent. "I am going to Boston." "Good," she said. "And don't expect us to co-sign anything. You are on your own." "I know," I said. "I have always been on your own." "Oh, stop with the dramatic victim act," she sneered. "You are so selfish. Nyla, you always have been. You think the world revolves around you. You want to take everything from this family? You want Ryder to walk to school? You want us to struggle? You are just like your mother, weak and demanding." That was the spark. I stood up. I was taller than her now. I hadn't realized it until that moment. I looked down at her. "Do not," I said, my voice shaking with a rage so pure it felt like white heat. "Talk about my mother." Lydia took a step back, surprised by the sudden aggression. Then her eyes narrowed. "Get out of my kitchen," she hissed. "It is Dad's kitchen," I said. "According to your logic." "And I am his wife," she spat, "which makes you nothing but a guest, and a rude one at that." She turned and marched out, yelling for my father to come deal with his daughter. I sat back down. My hands were shaking, but I forced them to still. I finished signing the papers. I folded them neatly and put them in an envelope. I looked around the kitchen. This room used to be yellow. My mother had painted it yellow because she said it felt like sunshine. Lydia had repainted it a cold, sterile gray 2 years ago. There was nothing left of my mother here. The money was gone. The color was gone. The love was gone. I realized then that I was not just a burden to them, I was a mirror. Every time they looked at me, they saw their own greed and cruelty reflected back. That was why they hated me. Not because I was bad, but because I was the living proof of what they had done. I made a decision right then and there. I would go to Boston. I would take the loans. I would work 3 jobs if I had to. I would scrub toilets, wait tables, answer phones. I would do whatever it took to build a wall of cash and distance between me and these people. I would leave Ohio, and I would never, ever ask them for a single cent again, because every penny from them came with a price tag that cost more than money. It cost my soul. I heard Ryder rev the engine of the new SUV outside. The roar of the motor vibrated through the window. It sounded like a monster. I grabbed my purse and the envelope. I needed to get to the post office before it closed. I walked out the back door, avoiding the driveway, slipping through the gap in the fence like a thief in the night. As I walked down the street, the cold wind biting at my face, I felt a strange sense of power. They had taken my money. They had taken my father. They had taken my home. But they had not taken my voice, not yet, and they had not taken my future. I touched the envelope in my pocket. It was a contract of debt. Yes, but it was also a declaration of independence. I stood on the stage, number 18 pinned to my chest. To my left was a tax attorney named Greg, who wore a 3-piece suit and had been bragging backstage about his photographic memory. To my right was a family physician, Dr. Eris, who had brought her entire clinic staff to cheer for her. I did not know then that the real fight was only just beginning. I did not know that a year later, I would return to that gray kitchen and face a violence that would leave scars on my skin as well as my heart. But for now, at 18, walking away was the bravest thing I had ever done. The summer I turned 19 was the summer I learned that rock bottom has a basement. I had survived my freshman year at UMass Boston by the skin of my teeth, while my classmates were posting photos of spring break in Cancun and complaining about 8 a.m. lectures. I was working 3 jobs. I scrubbed dishes at a diner on weekends, shelved books at the library between classes, and tutored remedial math in the evenings. I slept an average of 4 hours a night. My diet consisted of instant noodles and whatever food was about to expire at the diner. I had lost 15 pounds, and not in a healthy way. I looked gaunt, tired, and desperate. But I had made it. I had finished the year with a 3.8 GPA and enough credits to be considered a sophomore. I returned to Ohio in June, not because I wanted to see my family, but because I had no choice. The dorms were closed for the summer, and I could not afford a sublet in Boston. I told myself it would just be for 3 months. I would keep my head down, work at the local mall, and save every penny for the fall semester. I also had a naive, lingering hope. I thought that maybe, just maybe, there was a tiny scraping of money left in my mother's account. Even $500 would mean I could buy textbooks without panicking. The morning after I arrived, I drove to the First National Bank branch on Main Street. I walked up to the teller, a kind woman named Mrs. Gable, who used to give me lollipops when I was a child. "I would like to check the balance on the savings account ending in 452, I said, sliding my ID across the counter. Mrs. Gable typed on her keyboard. She frowned. She typed again. "Honey," she said, looking up with concern, "that account is closed." I felt the floor tilt beneath my feet. "Closed?" "Yes," she said. "It was emptied and closed out 4 months ago." "By who?" I asked, though my stomach was already churning with the answer. "Your father was the primary custodian," she said gently. "He signed the withdrawal slip. It was a cashier's check made out to, let me see here, Lydia Haynes." I walked out of the bank into the humid Ohio heat, but I felt like I was freezing to death. It was gone, all of it. The $40,000, the interest, the safety net my mother had broken her back to build. It had not just been dipped into for a car, it had been completely liquidated. I drove home. My hands were gripping the steering wheel so hard, my knuckles turned white. The rage I felt was different from the anger I had felt at 18. At 18, I was a hurt child. At 19, after a year of fending for myself in a brutal city, I was a tired, furious adult. I pulled into the driveway. The black SUV, Ryder's car, was parked in the prime spot. My old sedan, which sounded like a lawnmower, had to be parked on the street. I sat in the car for a moment. I looked at the house. It looked so normal. The lawn was manicured. The flower baskets were blooming. It was the perfect suburban camouflage for the rot inside. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone. It was an older model, a refurbished smartphone I had bought off a friend in Boston. I opened the utilities folder and found the voice memo app. I had developed a habit in the city. When I walked home late at night from the diner, or when I had to meet a landlord for a sketchy apartment viewing, I would hit record. It was a safety measure, a digital witness. I looked at the red button. My thumb hovered over it. "Do it," a voice in my head whispered. "They are going to lie. They always lie. Get the truth." I pressed the red circle. The timer started counting up. 0 seconds, 1 second, 2 seconds. I slid the phone into the front pocket of my jeans, microphone facing out. I took a deep breath, grabbed my purse, and walked into the house. Lydia was in the kitchen. She was arranging flowers in a crystal vase, humming a tune I did not recognize. She looked the picture of domestic bliss. "You are back early," she said without looking up. "Did you not get the shift at the mall?" "You stole it," I said. I did not shout. My voice was low, steady, and vibrating with intensity. Lydia paused. She snipped the stem of a rose with a sharp click of her shears. "Excuse me?" she said, turning to face me. "The bank account," I said. "The remaining balance. It is gone. Mrs. Gable told me Dad signed it over to you, every last cent." Lydia sighed, an exaggerated sound of boredom. She put the shears down on the counter. "Oh, for heaven's sake. Nyla, are we really doing this again? I told you last year. The finances are complicated. We had renovations to do. The roof needed fixing. Ryder needed tutors. We had to consolidate our assets. It was my mother's money," I said, stepping closer. "It was not for your roof. It was not for Ryder. It was for me. And you took it. You took every single dollar. How do you sleep at night?" Lydia laughed. It was a cold, ugly sound. "I sleep on a very comfortable mattress, Nyla, in a house that I manage," she said. "You are so dramatic. You are surviving in Boston, aren't you? You are clearly not starving. You are figuring it out. That is what adults do. We did you a favor by cutting the cord." "A favor?" I choked out. "You call theft a favor?" "Watch your mouth," she snapped, her eyes narrowing. "You have no right to come into my house and accuse me of anything. You have no right to touch the money in this house. Everything here belongs to your father and me. You are just a guest here. Nyla, a guest who is overstaying her welcome." I looked at her. I really looked at her. I saw the cruelty etched into the lines around her mouth. I saw the absolute lack of empathy in her eyes. And for the first time, I felt a wave of genuine fear. Not the fear of a child being scolded, but the primal fear of being in a cage with a dangerous animal. "I don't feel safe around you anymore," I said. My voice wavered slightly. "I don't feel safe in this house." The reaction was instantaneous. Lydia's face twisted into a snarl. "You ungrateful little brat," she screamed. She lunged forward. I did not expect it. I was 19. I was taller than her, but I was not ready for the violence. Her hand connected with the side of my face with a cracking sound that seemed to echo off the tile walls. It was a full-force, open-handed slap. My head snapped to the side. My vision went white for a second. The sting was immediate and blinding, spreading across my cheek and ear like fire. I stumbled back, raising my hands to protect my face. "Lydia!" I shouted. She did not stop. She stepped forward and shoved me, hard. Her hands slammed into my chest. I flew backward. My shoulder collided with the edge of the solid oak upper cabinets. I felt a sharp, sickening crunch as the wood dug into my muscle and bone. Pain radiated down my arm, numbing my fingers. I gasped, sliding down to the floor, clutching my shoulder. Lydia stood over me, her chest heaving. She looked wild. "Don't you ever say you are not safe here," she yelled. pointing a finger at my face. "I have fed you. I have clothed you. How dare you accuse me?" I sat there on the cold linoleum, stunned. My cheek was throbbing. My shoulder felt like it was on fire. I looked up at her, and I saw no regret. I saw only rage that her authority had been challenged. Then, the door from the living room opened. My father walked in. He was holding the newspaper. He looked at me, crumpled on the floor. Holding my arm, he looked at Lydia, who was standing over me with her face flushed red. He looked at the red mark that was rapidly blooming on my cheek. "Dad," I gasped. "She hit me. She threw me into the cabinet." My father stood there. The silence stretched out, agonizing and long. Lydia immediately burst into tears. It was a terrifying performance. "Oh, Frank," she sobbed, covering her face with her hands. "She came at me. She was screaming about money, calling me a thief. I was so scared. I just pushed her away. I didn't mean to hurt her, but she was so aggressive." I stared at her in disbelief. Aggressive? I had not moved a muscle toward her. "Dad, that is a lie," I said, struggling to stand up. My shoulders screamed in protest. I asked about the bank account. She slapped me. "Look at my face. Dad, look at it." My father looked at my cheek. The handprint was visible. There was no denying it. He looked at Lydia, who was now weeping into a dish towel. Then he looked back at me, and in his eyes, I saw the death of our relationship. I saw him calculate the cost of believing me. Believing me meant admitting his wife was violent. Believing me meant divorce, upheaval, and losing his comfort. Believing me meant facing the guilt of what he had allowed to happen for years. So he chose the path of least resistance. "Nyla," he said, his voice weary. "Please." "Please what?" I whispered. "Don't make a big deal out of this," he said. He did not help me up. He did not ask if I was okay. He just stood there, clutching his newspaper like a shield. "Tensions are high. We are all stressed. Lydia didn't mean it. You provoked her." "I provoked her?" I repeated, by asking why she stole $40,000. "It is family business." "Nyla!" he snapped, his voice rising for the first time. "Why do you always have to cause drama? Why can't you just let things be? Just go to your room. Put some ice on it. We will talk about this when everyone has calmed down." I looked at him, my father, the man who used to check under my bed for monsters. He was the monster, or rather, he was the monster's keeper. I realized then that there was no saving him. There was no waking him up. He was gone. I nodded slowly. The movement hurt my neck. "Okay," I said softly. "Okay, Dad." I turned and walked out of the kitchen. I did not run. I did not scream. I walked with the steady, measured pace of a soldier leaving a battlefield. I went up to my room. I closed the door and locked it. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely function. I went to the mirror. My cheek was bright red, swelling rapidly. My shoulder was already turning a deep, angry purple. I reached into my pocket and pulled out the phone. The screen was still glowing. The timer was at 8 minutes and 12 seconds. I pressed the red square to stop the recording. I hit play. The sound was crystal clear. "I don't feel safe around you anymore." Slap. The sound of my body hitting the wood. Lydia's screaming. My father's voice. "Don't make a big deal out of this. You provoked her." It was all there. Every lie, every hit, every betrayal. I did not pack a suitcase. That would take too long. I grabbed my backpack. I shoved my laptop, my wallet, and my chargers inside. I grabbed a few changes of clothes. I waited until midnight. The house was silent. I could hear my father's snoring from down the hall. I crept downstairs. My shoulder throbbed with every step, a constant reminder of why I could never come back. I slipped out the front door into the humid night air. I got into my car and locked the doors. I did not start the engine yet. I opened my laptop. I connected to the neighbor's unsecured Wi-Fi network that I had been using for years. I logged into my cloud storage account. I created a new folder. I named it Insurance. I uploaded the audio file. I watched the progress bar. Blue, steady, moving toward 100%. Upload complete. I sat back in the seat. Tears finally started to stream down my face, hot and salty. They were tears of pain. Yes, but also tears of relief. They thought I was just a helpless girl who had been put in her place. They thought this was just another night where Nyla would cry in her pillow and wake up to apologize in the morning. They didn't know I had the gun. I started the car. I backed out of the driveway without turning on my headlights. I drove down the street, past the sleeping houses, past the bank that held no money, past the memories of a life that no longer existed. I hit the highway ramp and headed east, back to Boston, back to the struggle. I had a bruised shoulder and a red cheek. I had $0 in my bank account. I had no family. But as I watched the exit signs for Columbus fade in the rearview mirror, I touched the phone in my pocket. "I have you," I whispered. I had the truth, and one day, when the timing was right, I was going to make them listen to it. I was going to make them hear the sound of their own cruelty until it deafened them. I drove into the dark, leaving the yellow house behind forever. The Nyla who lived there was dead. The Nyla who was driving away was someone entirely new. And she was never going to be silenced again. Boston was not a sanctuary, it was a forge. When I arrived back in the city after that night in June, I did not have the luxury of processing my trauma. I had $72 in my pocket and a tuition bill due in August that looked like a telephone number. The bruise on my shoulder turned from purple to a sickly yellow, a physical timer counting down the weeks I had to secure my survival. I stopped being just a student. I became a machine. For the next 2 years, I lived a life that would have killed a weaker person. My day started at 4 a.m. at a bakery in the North End, kneading dough until my forearms burned. By 8, I was in class. By 1 in the afternoon, I was at my work-study job in the university IT department. By 6 in the evening, I was waiting tables at a dive bar near Fenway Park, dodging drunk patrons and pocketing quarters for tips. I slept in 4-hour bursts. I ate food that was meant to be thrown away. I did not go to parties. I did not date. I did not go home for Thanksgiving or Christmas. When people asked where my family was, I told them I was an orphan. It was easier than explaining that I had parents who were alive but had chosen to bury me while I was still breathing. But in the midst of that exhaustion, something remarkable happened. I discovered that I had a talent. It started in the IT department. I was supposed to be answering phones and resetting passwords for forgetful professors. But in the quiet hours, I started looking at the network logs. I began to see patterns in the data that others missed. I noticed ghost traffic, anomalies in the billing systems, tiny discrepancies that suggested security flaws. Numbers, I realized, were better than people. People lied. People said they loved you and then watched you get hit. People promised to protect you and then stole your future. But numbers? Numbers were honest. If $1 was missing, it left a hole. If a file was accessed, it left a digital fingerprint. I became obsessed with digital forensics. I switched my major to computer science with a minor in criminology. I devoured every textbook, every case study. I learned how to track assets, how to recover deleted files, how to follow the digital breadcrumbs that people thought they had swept away. By my senior year, I was no longer working at the bakery. I had landed a junior analyst position at Northbridge Sentinel, a boutique data security firm that handled sensitive corporate investigations. Northbridge was my training ground. It was a world of glass walls, humming servers, and non-disclosure agreements. My boss, a woman named Sarah with eyes like laser beams, quickly realized that I had a unique motivation. I did not just want to solve puzzles. I wanted to expose liars. I worked on cases involving embezzlement, corporate espionage, and hidden assets in divorce settlements. I learned how executives hid money in offshore shell companies. I learned how they manipulated ledgers to fund secret lives. Every time I caught one of them, every time I handed over a dossier of irrefutable proof, I felt a surge of dark, vindictive satisfaction. I was practicing. I was sharpening my blade. It was during one of these cases that I met Arthur Holloway. He was a lawyer for one of our high-profile clients, A man in his 60s with a voice like gravel and a suit that cost more than my first car. We were in a conference room, and I had just walked him through a complex web of wire transfers that proved his client's partner was stealing from the company. Arthur listened in silence. When I finished, he looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "You are very thorough, Ms. Haynes," he said. "You look at data like it is a crime scene." "It usually is," I replied. He studied me for a long moment. There was a knowing look in his eyes, the look of a man who had seen enough family tragedies to recognize a survivor when he saw one. "If you ever need to protect the truth in court," he said, handing me his personal card, "you call me. I have a feeling you are fighting a battle that is not just about this company." I took the card. I did not tell him then that he was right. I did not tell him that every skill I was mastering was being cataloged for a specific future target. I was already watching them. Using the tools I had access to at Northbridge, and sticking strictly to public records and open-source intelligence to keep my hands clean, I began to build a profile on my father and Lydia. It was pathetic, really. I saw the credit card inquiries. I saw the refinancing of the house, twice in 3 years. I saw the liens that had been placed and then quietly removed. Lydia was burning through money at an alarming rate. The renovations she had screamed about in the kitchen were cosmetic. Expensive furniture, landscaping, trips to resorts in Florida that she tagged as business networking on social media. They were drowning, and they were using my grandmother's future inheritance as their life raft before she was even dead. That was when I knew I had to go back. It was November of my 24th year. I had been gone for 5 years. I had graduated. I was a shareholder at Northbridge, and I had bought my own apartment in Boston. I was strong. My bank account was healthy. I was no longer the girl who could be pushed into a cabinet. I rented a car and drove to Ohio. I did not tell my father. I did not tell Lydia. I drove straight to the assisted living facility where Grandma Eleanor had moved after her hip surgery. I checked in at the front desk. The receptionist looked at my ID. "Oh, Eleanor's granddaughter." She smiled. "She talks about you, but we usually see the other one, the grandson." "Ryder," I said, keeping my face neutral. "Yes, him. He usually comes when he needs. Well, he visits briefly." I knew what that meant. He came when he needed a check signed. I walked down the hallway. It smelled of lavender and antiseptic, a cleaner version of the hospital smell that haunted my childhood. I knocked on door 304. "Come in," a voice called out. It was frail, but the steel was still there. I opened the door. Grandma Eleanor was sitting in her armchair by the window, looking out at the gray Ohio sky. She looked smaller than I remembered, her white hair thin, her hands trembling slightly as they rested on a blanket. She turned, her eyes widened. "Nyla?" she whispered. "Hello, Grandma," I said. She tried to stand, but I rushed over and knelt beside her chair. She grabbed my face with both hands, her skin like dry paper, her eyes searching mine. "You came," she said. "You finally came. They told me you were too busy. Lydia said you wanted nothing to do with us. She said you hated this family." "Lydia lies, Grandma," I said softly. We spent the next 2 hours talking. I told her everything. I told her about the bakery, the jobs, the student loans I had paid off by myself. I told her about my career. I told her about the woman I had become. She listened, her eyes filling with a mixture of pride and sorrow. "I knew she was hard on you," Eleanor said, looking at her hands. "I knew she was cold. But your father, Frank always told me it was just teenage rebellion. He said you were difficult. He said you chose to leave because you were ungrateful." I reached into my bag. I pulled out my tablet. "I need you to hear something. Grandma," I said, "I have carried this for 5 years. I never used it because I just wanted to get away. But you need to know who is waiting for your money. You need to know who they really are." I placed the tablet on the small table between us. I brought up the file. Insurance. I pressed play. The room filled with the sounds of that summer kitchen. "I don't feel safe around you anymore." My voice sounded so young, so terrified. Slap. Grandma flinched. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then came the sound of the impact, the sickening thud of my body hitting the cabinets. "You ungrateful little brat!" Lydia's voice distorted by rage. And then, the most damning part, my father's voice. "Don't make a big deal out of this. You provoked her." The recording ended. The silence in the assisted living room was heavy, thick with the weight of 5 years of secrets. I rolled up the sleeve of my sweater. I turned my arm over. There, just below the shoulder, was a faint, jagged white line. It was where the corner of the cabinet molding had torn the skin. It wasn't a huge scar, but it was permanent. "This is what they did, Grandma," I said, "and they spent Mom's college fund to buy Ryder a car. They erased me. And now, they are just waiting for you to go so they can take everything you built and erase you too." Grandma Eleanor sat there for a long time. She did not cry. The women in our family were not criers. We were fixers. She looked at the scar on my arm. She looked at the tablet. Then, she looked at me. The frailty seemed to evaporate from her face. Her jaw set in a hard line. The fire I remembered from my childhood, the fire of a woman who had run her own business in the 70s, came back into her eyes. "Help me up, Nyla," she commanded. I helped her stand. She walked over to her desk, leaning heavily on her cane. She picked up the phone. "Who are you calling?" I asked. "Arthur Holloway," she said. My heart skipped a beat. The same Arthur Holloway I had met in Boston? It turned out the world of high-end law was smaller than I thought, or perhaps fate was just pulling the threads tight. "I need to make a change to my will," she said into the receiver. "A total revision. Yes, today. And Arthur? Bring a camera. I want this recorded." She hung up and turned to me. "She hit you," she said, her voice shaking with a cold rage. "She hit my granddaughter, and my son stood there and watched." She took my hand. "They think I am just a checkbook," she said. "They think because I am old, I am stupid. They think they have won." She squeezed my fingers. "We are going to teach them a lesson. Nyla, not a lesson in violence, a lesson in consequence." That afternoon, Arthur Holloway arrived. He recognized me immediately, raising an eyebrow but saying nothing unprofessional. We spent 4 hours in that room. Grandma Eleanor laid it all out. She drafted a new will, one that was complex, ironclad, and devastatingly specific. She appointed me as the sole executor. She created the stipulations. She set the trap. When it was done, she looked tired, but she looked at peace. "You have to be strong, Nyla," she told me as I prepared to leave. "When the time comes, they will hate you. They will say terrible things." I smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach my eyes. "Let them talk, Grandma," I said. "I have been the villain in their story for years. I might as well enjoy the role." I drove back to Boston that night. I did not stop to see the house. I did not visit my mother's grave. I had a mission now. I went back to my glass-walled office at Northbridge Sentinel. I went back to tracking assets and exposing liars. But now, I was waiting. I was waiting for the inevitable phone call. I was waiting for the end of one life and the beginning of the reckoning. I had built a new life from the ashes of the one they burned down, and now, armed with a dead woman's mandate and a digital smoking gun, I was ready to burn theirs down in return. The investigation was over. The trial was about to begin, and the judge, jury, and executioner would be the girl they thought they had silenced. Grandma Eleanor died on a Tuesday morning in late January, just as the frost was beginning to harden into a permanent sheet of ice over the Charles River. I did not receive a phone call. I found out through a notification algorithm I had set up years ago, a simple script designed to scan public obituaries and social media keywords related to the Haynes family. The alert pinged on my second monitor at Northbridge Sentinel, a silent, sterile announcement in a box of gray pixels. Eleanor Margaret Haynes, 82, passed away peacefully. I sat in my office, the hum of the servers, the only sound in the room. I did not cry. I had said my goodbyes 2 years ago in that lavender-scented room at the assisted living facility. I knew this day was coming, but what I was not prepared for was the immediate, suffocating wave of performative grief that followed. Within 2 hours of the time of death, Lydia had turned her Facebook page into a shrine. She posted a photo of herself holding Grandma's hand, a photo I knew she must have staged months ago because Grandma had refused to let Lydia touch her toward the end. Heaven gained an angel today. The caption read, "Our matriarch, the heart of our home, has left us. We are devastated, but we take comfort in knowing she is watching over the family she loved so much. Please respect our privacy as we mourn this tremendous loss." It garnered 200 likes in 40 minutes. I scrolled through the comments. "So sorry for your loss. Lydia, you were such a good daughter-in-law to her. She was lucky to have you." I felt a bile rise in my throat. It was the grief industrial complex, manufactured by a woman who had once complained that Grandma's medication was eating into the vacation budget. Then came the call from my father. I let it ring 3 times before picking up. I needed to make sure my voice was steady, stripped of all emotion. I needed to sound like the distant, estranged daughter they believed me to be. "Hello, Dad," I said. "Nyla," he said. His voice was rough, but it lacked the hollow echo of genuine sorrow. It sounded more like a man who was trying to clear a checklist. "Your grandmother passed away this morning." "I saw the post online," I said. "Right," he said, clearing his throat. "Well, it was peaceful. That is the important thing." There was a pause. I could hear Lydia whispering something in the background. "Look, Nyla," he continued, his tone shifting to one of brisk efficiency. "We are handling the arrangements. It is going to be a very small, private service, just immediate family and a few of her old bridge partners. Honestly, with the weather being what it is, and you being so busy in Boston, there is no need for you to come down." "No need?" I repeated. "We have everything sorted," he said quickly. "Lydia has organized the cremation. We are going to scatter the ashes at the lake house. Just us. It would probably just be awkward if you came, considering how things were left. We will mail you a program, and if she left you a keepsake, we will ship that too." He was uninviting me to my own grandmother's funeral. He was trying to bury her and the past in the same hole, ensuring that the only version of the story that survived was the one where he and Lydia were the devoted caretakers. "I understand," I said. "You want to keep it simple." "Exactly," he said, sounding relieved. "I knew you would be reasonable. It is better this way. No drama." "Goodbye, Dad," I said. "Bye, Nyla." The line went dead. I placed the phone on my desk. "No drama," I whispered to the empty office. 10 minutes later, my email chimed. It was the message I had been waiting for. Sender: Arthur Holloway. Senior partner: Holloway and Crestwell. Subject: Estate of Eleanor Haynes. Immediate action required. I opened it. The language was precise, cold, and legally binding. Dear Ms. Haynes, we offer our deepest condolences on the passing of your grandmother. Per the last will and testament of Eleanor Haynes, executed on November 14th, 2023, you have been named the sole executor of the estate. Furthermore, pursuant to Article 7, Section C, a reading of the will has been scheduled for this Friday at 9 a.m. at our Columbus offices. Your presence is not optional. It is mandatory for the unsealing of the assets. Please note, the deceased has included a specific codicil, the Truth in Testimony Clause, which states that no distribution of assets to any beneficiary, including the primary estate, may occur until a specific sworn statement regarding past domestic incidents is entered into the record. I leaned back in my chair, reading that last paragraph again. The Truth in Testimony Clause. Grandma Eleanor had done it. She had not just disinherited them, she had set a trap. She knew that simply cutting them out would lead to years of litigation. They would sue, claiming she was senile or under duress, but by making the inheritance conditional on the truth, she had cornered them. If they wanted the money, they had to admit to the abuse. If they denied the abuse, they violated the condition of the will, and the assets would be frozen or redirected. It was a legal checkmate. She was forcing them to choose between their greed and their lies, and she knew, just as I knew, that their greed was the stronger force. But I wasn't just relying on the will. I needed to be sure. I needed to know exactly what they were expecting, and exactly what they had already stolen. I opened my secure terminal. I initiated a deep dive into the public financial records of my father and Lydia. Lydia was not subtle. In the 48 hours since Grandma had entered hospice care last week, Lydia had been busy. I saw the digital chatter. She had been messaging her sisters, bragging in private group chats that I had managed to mirror through a compromised cloud account she shared with my father. Finally happening, Lydia had written to her sister Ruth, "The old bat is going. Once the probate clears, we are free. Ryder gets his startup capital, and we are buying the condo in Sarasota. The Main family finally gets what we deserve." The Main family. She truly believed it. She believed that because I had been quiet, I had been defeated. She believed that possession was 9/10 of the law, and since she possessed the house and the narrative, she possessed the future. But then, I found something that turned my cold calculation into white-hot fury. I was reviewing the transaction history of Grandma's brokerage account, the one she had given me view-only access to years ago, which I had never touched but monitored. 2 months ago, there had been a sale. 5,000 shares of blue-chip stock, held since 1985. The value was nearly $400,000. The authorization signature was digital. It was signed Eleanor Haynes. But 2 months ago, Grandma's arthritis was so bad she could not hold a stylus. And on the date of the transaction, the medical logs showed she was heavily sedated after a fall. I traced the IP address of the device that authorized the sale. It did not come from the assisted living facility. It came from the Wi-Fi network at my father's house. Lydia. She hadn't just waited for the will. She had gotten impatient. She had accessed Grandma's account, likely using a password she found or coerced, and she had liquidated nearly $500,000 of assets before the owner was even dead. Where did the money go? I followed the trail. It didn't go into my father's main account. It went into a shell LLC registered in Delaware under the name LRH Consulting. LRH, Lydia Renee Haynes. She had stolen $400,000. This was not just a civil dispute anymore. This was wire fraud. This was elder abuse. This was a federal crime. I printed the transaction logs. I printed the IP trace. I printed the medical records showing Grandma's incapacity on that date. I organized them into a crisp, black binder. The sun was setting over Boston, casting long, bloody streaks of light across the skyline. My office felt like a war room. I looked at the pile of evidence. I looked at the email from the lawyer. My father had told me not to come because everything was sorted. He thought he was saving himself from an awkward afternoon. He had no idea that he was walking into an ambush. They were going to walk into that room expecting a coronation. They were going to sit in the plush leather chairs, drink the law firm's coffee, and wait for the lawyer to hand them a check. Lydia was probably already mentally spending the money on drapes for the Sarasota condo. Ryder was probably picking out a new car to replace the one he wrecked last year. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked at my reflection in the glass. I didn't look like the girl with the bruised shoulder anymore. I looked like the executor. I picked up my phone and dialed Arthur Holloway. "Mr. Holloway," I said when he answered. "This is Nyla." "Ms. Haynes," he said. His voice was grave. "I assume you received the notice?" "I did," I said. "And I have found something else. Something regarding a transaction made 2 months ago." There was a pause on the line. "Is it significant?" "It is criminal," I said. "I am bringing the documentation. Do not tell them I am coming. Do not tell them anything." "I follow the instructions of the executor," Arthur said. I could hear a hint of grim satisfaction in his voice. "The conference room is prepared. We have the audio-visual equipment set up as requested in the codicil." "Good," I said. "One more thing. Arthur?" "Yes?" "Make sure there are extra chairs," I said. I am bringing the rest of the family, the ones Lydia forgot. Understood, he said. I hung up. I packed the binder into my leather briefcase. I packed the external hard drive containing the audio file from when I was 19. I packed my black suit, the one that looked like armor. I was going home. But I wasn't going back to the yellow house. I wasn't going back to be the victim. I was going back to be the judge. Lydia wanted the Main family to inherit everything? Fine. She was about to find out that the definition of family was about to change, and the price of admission to this reading was going to be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. I walked out of the Northbridge building and into the cold night. The wind whipped at my coat, but I didn't feel the chill. I was fueled by a fire that had been burning for 8 years. See you Friday, Dad, I whispered. The game was set. The players were in position, and they had absolutely no idea that the king was dead, and the queen was about to be taken off the board. The wind off Lake Erie was screaming against the glass walls of my penthouse, a chaotic symphony of ice and fury. But inside, the air was still and warm. I had spent the last 2 hours transforming my fortress of solitude into something I had not experienced in nearly a decade. I was turning it into a home. I adjusted the dimmer on the lights, bathing the sprawling open-concept living room in a soft, amber glow. I had ordered enough food to feed an army, trays of roasted meats, mountains of grilled vegetables, fresh bread, and bottles of wine that cost more than the weekly grocery budget of my entire childhood. I wanted abundance. I wanted excess. I wanted to erase the memory of portion-controlled meals and being told that taking a second roll was greedy. Tonight was not about showing off my wealth. It was about proving a point. It was about redefining who had a seat at the table. The intercom buzzed at 6 p.m. Ms. Haynes, the concierge's voice crackled. Your guest has arrived, a Ms. Ruth Miller. Send her up, I said. Send everyone up. I stood by the heavy oak door, my heart hammering a rhythm against my ribs that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with anticipation. I had not seen my Aunt Ruth in 4 years. She was my mother's younger sister, a woman with a laugh like a trumpet and a heart too big for her chest. Lydia had systematically cut her out of our lives with the precision of a surgeon removing a tumor. First, it was the forgotten invitations. Then, it was the snide comments about Ruth's job as a bus driver. Finally, it was the outright ban. Fueled by a lie, Lydia told my father about Ruth asking for money. The elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. Ruth stood there, clutching a worn handbag, shaking the snow off a coat that had seen better winters. She looked older. Her hair was more gray than brown now, and lines of hardship were etched deep around her eyes. She looked at the marble floors of the hallway, then at the art on the walls, and finally, her eyes landed on me. I was wearing a simple cashmere sweater and jeans, standing barefoot on the heated floors. Nyla, she whispered, as if she were seeing a ghost. Hi, Aunt Ruth, I said. She dropped her bag. She crossed the distance between us in 3 strides and pulled me into a hug that squeezed the breath out of me. It smelled of peppermint and rain, the scent of my childhood, the scent of the safety I had lost. Look at you, she sobbed into my shoulder. Oh, honey, look at you. Lydia told us. She told us you were struggling. She said you were living in a basement somewhere, barely making rent. I pulled back and wiped a tear from her cheek. Lydia says a lot of things. Ruth, come inside. I led her into the main living area. When she saw the wall of windows overlooking the glittering city, the fire crackling in the gas hearth, and the table set for 12, she stopped dead in her tracks. You own this? She asked, her voice hushed. I do, I said. Every inch? She looked at me, and then she started to cry again. But these were not tears of sadness. They were tears of vindication. She lied, Ruth said, shaking her head. She wanted us to think you were a failure so we wouldn't reach out. She wanted to keep you isolated. She failed, I said. The elevator chimed again, and then again. Over the next 30 minutes, my penthouse filled with the others. There was my cousin Marcus, a mechanic who Lydia had banned from the house because his boots dirtied the floors, and because he once corrected her on a car fact. There was Sarah, my second cousin, a single mother who Lydia had called trashy behind her back and refused to invite to Thanksgiving. There was Uncle Ben, my mother's brother, who had stopped coming around because he couldn't stand watching my father shrink into a shadow. They walked in tentatively at first, eyes wide, expecting a trap. They were used to family gatherings where judgment was the main course. They were used to the kids' table, the folding card table set up in the hallway or the laundry room, while Lydia and her chosen few sat in the dining room. "Welcome," I said, raising my voice to be heard over the wind outside. "Please, sit anywhere. There are no assigned seats here, and there is no kids' table." We sat down around the long, reclaimed wood table. The amber light reflected off the wine glasses. For the first few minutes, the only sounds were the clinking of silverware and the murmurs of awe at the food. But then, the wine started to flow, and with it, the stories. It started with Marcus. He took a sip of Pinot Noir and looked at me. "You know," he said, chuckling darkly, "the last time I saw Lydia, she told me to park my truck 2 streets over, said it was an eyesore that would bring down the property value during her garden party. I walked 3 blocks in the rain to get to the front door, and when I got there, she asked me to use the service entrance." A ripple of angry laughter went around the table. "She did that to me, too," Sarah said, putting down her fork. "When I was pregnant with Toby, she told me I shouldn't come to the Christmas photo shoot. She said I didn't fit the aesthetic she was going for. She said my stomach was distracting. She threw away the quilt I made for Eleanor," Aunt Ruth said quietly. The table went silent. "I spent 6 months stitching that quilt. It had pictures of all of us on it. I gave it to Eleanor for her 80th birthday. 2 weeks later, I saw it in the Goodwill pile in the garage. Lydia told me Eleanor didn't like the fabric, but I asked Eleanor later. She never even saw it." I looked around the table at these faces. My blood, my people. They were good people. They were hardworking, honest, and kind. And they had been made to feel like garbage for years by a woman whose only talent was manipulation. "She erased us," Uncle Ben said, gripping his glass. "Bit by bit. She made Frank think we were the problem. She whispered in his ear until he stopped taking our calls. And we let her. That is the worst part. We just faded away." "Not anymore," I said. I stood up. The conversation died down. All eyes turned to me at the head of the table. I reached down to the floor beside my chair and picked up the black briefcase. I placed it on the table. The heavy thud it made sounded like a gavel. I opened it. I took out the external hard drive and the thick black binder of financial records. "You are wondering why I asked you all here tonight," I said. "It is not just for dinner, and it is not just to reconnect." I placed my hand on the hard drive. "Tomorrow morning is the reading of Grandma Eleanor's will," I continued. "Lydia and my father think it is just going to be them. They think they are going to walk in, sign some papers, and take the last thing Grandma had left. They think I'm not coming." "Are you?" Marcus asked. "I am the executor," I revealed. Gasps went around the table. Ruth's hand flew to her mouth. "Grandma knew," I said. "Before she died, she and I talked. She knew everything Lydia did. She knew about the stolen money. She knew about the lies. And she knew about the abuse." I paused, letting the word hang in the air. Abuse. "She hit me," I said, my voice steady. "When I was 19, she slapped me and threw me into a cabinet because I asked about my mother's college fund. And my father stood there and watched. He did nothing." A low murmur of anger swept through the room. Uncle Ben's face turned red. "I have proof." I tapped the hard drive. "I have a recording of that night. I have financial records showing Lydia has been stealing from Grandma for months. And tomorrow, I am going to walk into that law firm, and I'm going to play this recording in front of them." I looked at each of them. "But Grandma added a condition to the will," I explained. "It is called the Truth and Testimony Clause. No one gets a dime unless the truth about the family history is acknowledged. If they deny it, they lose everything. If they admit it, they are exposed." "So what do you need from us?" Sarah asked, leaning forward. I need witnesses, I said. I don't just want to be a voice on a tape. I want to show them that they didn't just hurt me. They hurt this entire family. I want to walk into that room with the people they threw away. I want them to look at us, successful, happy, and together, and realize that they are the ones who are alone. The room was silent for a long moment. It was a heavy silence, but it wasn't oppressive. It was the silence of people deciding to stand up after years of kneeling. Marcus stood up first. He raised his wine glass. I was at the house the summer you were 16, he said. I saw her lock you out in the rain because you didn't do the dishes fast enough. I didn't say anything then because I was a kid and I was scared of her. I am not scared anymore. He looked me in the eye. If you need a witness, use my name. I will be there. Me too, Sarah said, standing up. I remember the way she talked to you, like you were a dog. I will testify to that. I am coming, Ruth said, her voice fierce. I am coming to see the look on her face when she realizes she can't hide behind Frank anymore. One by one, they all stood. 8 people, my real family. I felt a lump form in my throat, but I swallowed it down. I couldn't break now. Thank you, I said. We meet at Holloway and Crestwell at 8:45 in the morning. Wear your best clothes. We are not going there to fight. We are going there to end the war. We spent the rest of the night plotting. It felt like a war council, but one fueled by love rather than hate. I showed them the timeline. I explained the legal strategy Arthur and I had discussed. I warned them that Lydia would scream, that she would cry, that she would play the victim. Let her scream, Uncle Ben said, cutting a piece of steak. We have the truth, and truth is quiet. By the time the last cousin left, the storm outside had broken. The wind had died down, leaving a pristine, silent blanket of snow over the city. I stood by the window with Aunt Ruth, who was the last to leave. She wrapped her coat around herself and looked at me. Your mother would be so proud of you, Nyla, she said softly. Not because of the money, but because you fought back. I am not doing this for revenge, Ruth, I said, looking at the reflection of the city lights in the glass. I am doing this so I can finally sleep. Well, Ruth said, opening the door, tomorrow, you are going to wake up to a whole new world. Get some rest. Executor, you have a gavel to bang. I locked the door behind her. The penthouse was quiet again, but it didn't feel empty. It felt charged. I walked over to the table and picked up the hard drive. It was cold to the touch. I thought about my father. I thought about him sitting in his house right now, probably drinking a scotch, telling himself that everything was fine, that he had managed the situation, that his troublesome daughter was hundreds of miles away. He was sleeping soundly, believing in a peace that was nothing more than a pause before the explosion. I turned off the lights. Sleep well, Dad, I whispered into the darkness, because tomorrow, the ghosts are coming to breakfast. The conference room at Holloway and Crestwell was located on the 42nd floor, a glass-walled aquarium floating above the gray, slushy grid of downtown Columbus. It was a room designed to intimidate. The table was a slab of polished black granite that looked like a landing strip. The leather chairs cost more than the cars my cousins drove. The air smelled of lemon oil and old money. I sat at the head of the table, to the right of Arthur Holloway's empty chair. I had arrived at 8 in the morning, a full hour before the scheduled reading. I wanted to be part of the architecture when they walked in. I wanted to be immovable. At 8:30, the elevator doors down the hall chimed. My army arrived first. Aunt Ruth led the way, wearing her Sunday best, a navy blue dress that she had likely owned for 10 years, pressed to within an inch of its life. Behind her came Uncle Ben, Cousin Marcus, Sarah, and 3 others who had been exiled from the Haynes Kingdom over the last decade. They looked nervous as they walked past the receptionist, their eyes darting around the opulent space. They were people who worked with their hands, people who were used to being told to use the back door. In here, I called out, standing up. When they saw me, their shoulders dropped an inch. I wasn't the scared niece anymore. I was the anchor. "Take the left side," I instructed, pointing to the long row of chairs facing the windows. "Fill every seat, leave no gaps." They filed in silently. There was a solemnity to their movement, like jurors taking their box. Ruth squeezed my shoulder as she passed, her hand warm and trembling slightly. Marcus gave me a curt nod, his jaw set hard. They sat down, folded their hands on the granite, and waited. At 8:55, the elevator chimed again. I heard her before I saw her. "I do not care what the parking validation policy is," Lydia's voice carried down the hallway, shrill and demanding. "We are here for the Haynes estate. You will validate the ticket for the full day." I took a sip of water. My hand was steady. A moment later, the double doors swung open. Lydia swept in like she was arriving at a gala. She was wearing a black fur coat that looked entirely too festive for a memorial reading, paired with diamond earrings that caught the harsh fluorescent light. Underneath, she wore a tailored black suit that screamed designer. She looked victorious. She looked like a woman who had already spent the money in her head. My father followed her, looking smaller than I remembered. He wore his gray suit, the one he saved for weddings and funerals, but it hung loosely on his frame. He was clutching a takeout coffee cup like a lifeline. Ryder brought up the rear, wearing a button-down shirt that was untucked and an expression of profound boredom. He was tapping away on his phone, barely looking up. "Honestly, Frank, the service in this building is," Lydia began, but the sentence died in her throat. She had turned the corner and seen the table. She stopped so abruptly that my father almost bumped into her. Her eyes swept over the line of people on the left. She saw Ruth. She saw Marcus. She saw the faces she had spent years erasing. Her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again. "What is this?" she hissed, turning to my father. "What are they doing here? This is a private reading." Then, her gaze traveled to the head of the table. She saw me. I was wearing a charcoal suit, my hair pulled back, my posture rigid. I met her eyes and held them. I did not blink. I did not smile. "Nyla?" she said, the name coming out as a choked question. My father looked at me, and the color drained from his face. He looked at his phone, likely remembering the text he had sent me 3 days ago. "Don't come." "You?" Lydia stepped forward, her finger raising instinctively to point at me. "I told your father to tell you. We said this was immediate family only. You have no business being here, and certainly not sitting there." She gestured to the head of the table. "That is the executor's seat," she snapped. "Get up. You are embarrassing yourself." The door to the inner office opened, and Arthur Holloway stepped out. He was a tall man with silver hair and the gravity of a judge. He carried a thick file under his arm. "Good morning," Arthur said, his voice booming baritone cutting through the tension. "Mr. Holloway." Lydia turned to him, putting on her best socialite smile, though it looked brittle. "I apologize for the circus. My stepdaughter and her entourage seem to be under the impression that they are invited. If you could have security escort them out, we can proceed with the business at hand." Arthur walked to the head of the table. He stood next to me. He placed the file on the granite. "There is no mistake. Mrs. Haynes," Arthur said calmly. "Everyone present is here at my request." He looked at me, and Ms. Haynes is sitting exactly where she belongs. Lydia laughed, a nervous, trilling sound. "I don't understand. Frank is the executor. It has been that way for 20 years. "It was," Arthur corrected. "Until November 14th, 2023, on that date, the late Eleanor Haynes executed a new will, revoking all previous drafts. In that document, she named Nyla Haynes as the sole executor and administrator of the estate." The silence that followed was absolute. You could hear the hum of the HVAC system. Lydia's face went from pale to a blotchy red. She whipped her head toward my father. "Frank?" she demanded. "Did you know about this?" My father shook his head. He looked like he was going to be sick. He pulled out a chair and sat down heavily, his hands shaking so much that coffee sloshed out of the little spout in the lid onto his knuckles. He didn't even wipe it off. "Sit down, Mrs. Haynes," Arthur said. It was not a suggestion. Lydia stood there for a moment, vibrating with rage. She looked at the excluded side of the table. Ruth stared back at her with a look of stone-cold judgment. Marcus crossed his arms. They were a wall. Lydia realized she had no choice. She walked to the right side of the table, the empty side, and sat down. Ryder sat next to her, finally looking up from his phone, sensing that something had gone wrong. "This is ridiculous," Lydia muttered, loudly enough for everyone to hear. "She is a child. She is estranged. She barely saw Eleanor in the last 5 years. We will be contesting this competence." "You are welcome to file whatever motions you wish after the reading," Arthur said, opening the file. "But for now, the law recognizes Lila Haynes as the authority in this room." He put on his reading glasses. "We are here to distribute the assets of Eleanor Margaret Haynes," Arthur began. "The estate is valued at approximately $3.2 million, including real estate, securities, and personal property." Lydia's eyes lit up at the number. Greed momentarily overpowered her anger. I saw her hand creep over and cover my father's hand, squeezing it. "However," Arthur said, pausing, he looked over his glasses at Lydia. "Before we get to the schedule of distribution, there is a specific codicil that must be addressed." Eleanor was very clear. "The distribution of assets is conditional." "Conditional on what?" Ryder asked, speaking for the first time. "On the truth," Arthur said. He turned a page in the file. The codicil is titled The Truth in Testimony Clause. It states that no beneficiary may receive their inheritance if there is any standing record of unacknowledged violence, theft, or coercion within the family unit. Lydia stiffened. "I don't know what you're talking about. We are a loving family." Eleanor was confused at the end. "Eleanor was perfectly lucid," I spoke up. My voice was calm, contrasting sharply with the pounding of my heart. She knew exactly what was happening in her family. She knew about the money, Lydia, and she knew about the kitchen. Lydia's head snapped toward me. "Excuse me?" "The kitchen," I repeated. "The summer I was 19. "I have no idea what you are referring to," Lydia said, her voice pitching higher. "You are delusional. Frank, tell him she is delusional." My father looked at the table. He did not speak. "Arthur," I said, sliding the external hard drive across the smooth granite, "please proceed with the evidence exhibit." Lydia stared at the small black rectangle. "Evidence? This is a will reading, not a trial." "In this room, it is both," Arthur said. He took the drive. He plugged it into the port of the laptop connected to the room's main audiovisual system. A large screen on the far wall flickered to life. The room dimmed slightly as the projector engaged. On the screen, a File Explorer window appeared. There was a single folder named The Truth. Arthur clicked it. Inside were 2 files. One was a PDF labeled Forensic Accounting, Unauthorized Withdrawals. The other was an audio file labeled June 2018. Kitchen. "What is that?" Lydia stood up, panic finally breaking through her arrogance. "You cannot play that. This is illegal. I did not consent to being recorded." "Ohio is a one-party consent state," Arthur said without looking up. "As long as one person in the conversation consents to the recording, it is admissible. Lila consented." "Frank!" Lydia grabbed my father's arm and shook him. "Do something! Stop them!" My father looked up. His eyes were watery, red-rimmed. He looked at me, and for a second, I saw a plea. He wanted me to stop. He wanted me to save him, just like I had always done by staying silent. I looked back at him, and I shook my head slowly. "No." "Sit down, Lydia," my father whispered hoarsely. "What?" she screeched. "Sit down," he said, louder this time. Lydia collapsed back into her chair, her face a mask of terror. She looked at the screen. She looked at the file name. She knew. She remembered. The room was so quiet that the sound of Arthur's mouse clicking sounded like a gunshot. "Exhibit A," Arthur announced. "Audio recording, dated June 12th, 2018. He pressed play. For the first few seconds, there was only the static hiss of the recording starting. Then, the sounds of a domestic afternoon filled the boardroom, the clinking of shears, the hum of a refrigerator. Then, my voice, young, desperate, shaking. The bank account, the remaining balance. It is gone. Mrs. Gable told me Dad signed it over to you. Every last cent. Lydia on the recording laughed. It was the same cruel, dismissive laugh she had used 5 minutes ago. I sleep on a very comfortable mattress. Nyla, you are so dramatic. In the boardroom, the real Lydia had gone deathly pale. She was gripping the arms of her leather chair so hard her knuckles were white. The recording continued. The tension built. I don't feel safe around you anymore. I don't feel safe in this house. Then the explosion. You ungrateful little brat. The sound of the slap was deafening in the acoustically treated room. It was a sharp, wet crack that made Aunt Ruth flinch physically. Then came the scuffle, the heavy thud of my body hitting the cabinets, the gasp of pain. Lydia closed her eyes. Ryder was staring at the speaker, his mouth slightly open, looking from his mother to the screen. Then, the final dagger, my father's voice. Don't make a big deal out of this. You provoked her. Arthur stopped the recording. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. It hung over the table like a physical weight. I looked at my father. He was weeping. Silent tears were rolling down his cheeks, dripping onto his tie. He was not looking at me. He was looking at his hands, the hands that had done nothing to stop it. Lydia was not crying. She was staring at the table, her mind clearly racing, trying to find an angle, a lie, a way out. That, Lydia whispered, her voice shaking, that is manipulated. It is AI. It is fake. We have verified the metadata, Arthur said coldly, and we have the medical records from the urgent care clinic Nyla visited 2 days later in Boston, documenting a contusion on her right shoulder and a hematoma on her cheek. He clicked the second file. The PDF opened. Furthermore, Arthur continued, his voice taking on a harder edge, we have the matter of the theft. The screen filled with spreadsheets, rows of red numbers. On November 10th, 4 days before Eleanor passed, a transfer of $412,000 was initiated from her brokerage account. The IP address traces back to your home router. Mrs. Haynes, the authorization was signed by Eleanor, who was at that moment in a medically induced sleep. Arthur looked up. That is wire fraud. Mrs. Haynes, and elder abuse. We have already prepared the packet for the district attorney. Whether or not we send it depends entirely on what happens in the next 10 minutes. Lydia looked at the screen, then at Arthur, then at me. The arrogance was gone. The socialite veneer had cracked and fallen away, revealing a scared, greedy woman who had been caught red-handed. She looked at Ryder. Ryder, it was for us. It was for the condo. Ryder pulled his chair away from her. The screech of the chair legs on the floor was loud and harsh. He looked at his mother with a mixture of disgust and self-preservation. Don't bring me into this, Ryder said. I didn't know you stole it. Frank? Lydia turned to my father, desperate. My father finally looked up. He looked at the screen where the evidence of his failure was glowing in high definition. Then he looked at Aunt Ruth, who was staring at him with 20 years of disappointment in her eyes. It is true, my father said. His voice was a whisper. Frank, Lydia gasped. It is true, he said louder. He turned to Lydia. You hit her? I saw it. And you took the money. I knew you took the money. You signed the checks, Lydia screamed. Because you told me to, he shouted back, his voice cracking. Because I was a coward. But I'm not going to jail for you. Lydia, I am not going to jail. Arthur Holloway closed the laptop. The screen went black, but the image was burned into everyone's retinas. The condition of the will has been met, Arthur said. The truth has been established. Now, we can proceed to the distribution. He turned to me. Ms. Haynes, he said, as executor, the floor is yours. I stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. I looked down the long granite table at the wreckage of the people who had tried to break me. "Thank you, Arthur," I said. I looked at Lydia. She was trembling, defeated, trapped in the corner she had painted herself into. "You thought I would never speak up," I said to her. "You banked on my silence. You invested in it." I leaned forward, placing my hands on the cool stone. "But the market has changed, Lydia, and your investment just crashed." The air in the room was so thin, it felt like we were at high altitude. The hum of the projector fan was the only sound for a heartbeat, a mechanical whir that underscored the devastation that had just played out through the speakers. My father's recorded voice, "Don't make a big deal out of this," seemed to hang in the corners of the room like smoke. Arthur Holloway did not give Lydia time to recover. He stood by the laptop, his hand resting on the trackpad, looking less like a lawyer and more like a high priest of judgment. "For those who may be unclear," Arthur said, his voice cutting through the silence with surgical precision, "the recording you just heard was time-stamped June 12, 2018. It was recorded on a device belonging to Lila Haynes. The audio spectrum analysis confirms no splicing, no editing, and no AI manipulation. It is a raw, unadulterated capture of a felony assault." "It is a lie!" Lydia shrieked. Jumping to her feet again, her face was a mask of blotchy red panic. She looked around the room, her eyes darting from face to face, looking for an ally. She found none. "It is a lie. That is taken out of context. We were having an argument about her grades. She came at me. She was hysterical. I pushed her away in self-defense. You cannot prove otherwise." She pointed a shaking finger at me. "She is a manipulator. She has always been jealous of me. She staged this. She probably hit herself to get sympathy." I sat still. I did not need to scream. The truth was doing the screaming for me. "Self-defense," Arthur repeated calmly. "An interesting theory, Mrs. Haynes." He clicked the mouse. The screen behind him changed. The waveform of the audio file disappeared, replaced by a high-resolution photograph. It was an image of my right shoulder, taken in the harsh lighting of a dormitory bathroom mirror. The skin was a canvas of violence. A deep, purple-black bruise bloomed across the deltoid, spreading down toward the bicep. In the center, the skin was broken in a jagged line where the corner of the oak cabinet had bitten into me. "This photo was taken 48 hours after the incident," Arthur narrated, his tone devoid of emotion. "The metadata embedded in the file confirms the date and location: Boston, Massachusetts, June 14, 2018. He clicked again. Another photo appeared. This one was of my face. My cheek was swollen, the imprint of a hand clearly visible in the discoloration of the skin. "And this," Arthur said, "a contusion consistent with a high-impact strike from an open hand. Note the finger marks." Lydia stared at the screen. Her mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. The self-defense argument died instantly against the visual reality of a battered 19-year-old girl. That could have happened anywhere," Lydia stammered, her voice dropping to a desperate whisper. "She could have fallen. She could have gotten into a fight at school. You cannot prove I did that." "I can," a voice said from the left side of the table. The sound of the chair scraping against the floor was loud. Aunt Ruth stood up. She was trembling, clutching her purse with both hands, but her chin was held high. She looked at my father, who was still staring at his own hands, and then she looked directly at Lydia.